I still remember the first time I realized my family didn't see me as the main character in my own life. I was 15, sitting at the dinner table with my mom, stepdad, and his golden child of a son, Tyler. It was one of those ordinary nights where we were all supposed to be bonding over meatloaf and mashed potatoes. But instead of asking me about my first solo at the school concert, which I'd been nervously hyping up for days, the entire table was buzzing over Tyler's accidental touchdown in gym class. I just kept chewing in silence, pretending not to care. That night stuck with me not because it was particularly cruel, but because it was so normal, so painfully, regularly dismissive. My name's Jason. I'm 29 now, but back then, I was just a quiet teenager trying to keep the peace in a house that never quite felt like home. After my dad passed away when I was 10, my mom eventually remarried. Enter Greg, my stepfather, a man with a booming laugh, a perfectly trimmed beard, and a son who could do no wrong. Tyler was my age, only 3 months older, but you'd think he was 10 years ahead in life based on how Greg talked about him. That boy's a natural leader, he'd say. Or, Tyler's going places, just like his old man. Meanwhile, I was the kid who needed to step it up, or be more like Tyler. It wasn't always outright malicious. Sometimes, it was subtle, dismissive glances, backhanded compliments, or just a lack of interest in anything I cared about. But it added up. By high school, the dynamic was cemented. Tyler was the quarterback, the class clown, the guy who dated cheerleaders and got invited to every party. I was the quiet one, debate team, AP classes, part-time job at the bookstore. I didn't resent Tyler at first. Honestly, I didn't have time. I was too focused on getting out. College was my way out, and I knew it. So I kept my head down, kept my grades up, and let him have the spotlight. Tyler wasn't cruel in the way movie bullies are. He didn't shove me into lockers or steal my lunch money. No, he was more calculated. Like when he accidentally wore the same outfit as me to school just to make a joke about who wore it better. Or the time he told everyone at Thanksgiving that I'd gotten rejected from my dream school, which wasn't true, and laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. My mom would always brush it off. Boys tease, she'd say, or don't be so sensitive, Jason. Greg, of course, would just chuckle and toss Tyler another serving of turkey. It wasn't until college that things started shifting. I got into a solid state university with a scholarship, while Tyler bounced between community college and what he called entrepreneurial ventures, which mostly meant failed dropshipping businesses and asking Greg for money. Still, whenever I came home for the holidays, he'd hold court like a mini celebrity. Even after his second suspension for cheating on an exam, Greg introduced him at a family barbecue as the next big tech mogul. I brought up my internship at a major finance firm and got a distracted, "That's nice, son," in response. I shouldn't have cared, but it still stung. Then came Becca. We met during my junior year of college. She was studying communications, smart, kind, and had a laugh that could cut through any bad day. We started as classmates, but it didn't take long before study sessions turned into dinner dates and coffee runs into weekend getaways. She was my person. The first time I brought her home, I was nervous. Not because of her. I knew she'd be graceful and kind, but because of them. My family had a way of souring things. And like clockwork, they did. Tyler was visiting that weekend. He showed up late to dinner, made a scene about his car troubles, and slid into the seat next to Becca like he owned it. He turned the charm up to 11, asking her questions, making jokes, leaning in just a bit too close. She handled it well, laughed politely, but I saw the way his eyes lingered when she stood to get water. I saw the smirk when she mentioned she was with me. I also saw the look Greg gave him afterward, some proud, masculine nod like, "Attaboy." After that dinner, I asked Becca if Tyler had made her uncomfortable. She shook her head. "He's harmless," she said. "Kind of full of himself, though." I let it go. I shouldn't have. Things were good for a while. After college, I landed a solid job at a financial firm. Worked my way up quietly while Tyler floundered in get-rich-quick schemes. He had a podcast for a while about crypto, then some NFT project that nearly got VC funding, which of course never materialized. Greg still bankrolled him, and my mom kept pretending not to notice the overdraft notices that came in the mail. Becca and I moved in together after a year of dating, and I was planning to propose by year 2. It felt like life was finally going my way. The night I proposed, I took her to the little coastal town we used to visit during college breaks. A cozy cabin, wine, and just the two of us under a starlit sky. She said yes, cried happy tears, and we spent the rest of the night dreaming about our future, kids, houses, careers, all of it. For once, I let myself believe that I was the lucky one, that I had something Tyler couldn't touch. But I was wrong. It started with little things. Becca getting weird texts late at night and brushing them off as work messages. Her suddenly being too tired for our weekend plans. A few times, she mentioned running into Tyler. Once at the gym, another time at a cafe by total coincidence. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I said nothing. But a pit started growing in my stomach. Then, 3 months before the wedding, I came home early from work. Becca was in the kitchen, on the phone, whispering. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when I heard the words, "He doesn't suspect a thing," I froze. She hung up quickly when she saw me and forced a smile. "Hey babe, you're home early." I asked who she was talking to. She said it was a coworker, but her voice cracked just a bit. And that pit in my stomach? It turned into something sharp. The next day, I checked her phone while she was in the shower. I hated myself for it, but I needed the truth. And there it was. Messages between her and Tyler. Flirty at first, then explicit, then cruel. Things like, "Can't wait till we don't have to sneak around anymore. And he's so boring, isn't he?" My hands shook as I scrolled, reading months of betrayal laid out in blue and gray bubbles. The worst one, a selfie of the two of them in my own apartment. Him in my hoodie, her in my shirt. My whole world collapsed in a single swipe. I didn't confront them. Not then. I needed time. I needed a plan. I quietly canceled the wedding venue, spoke to my lawyer, got my name off the lease, and disappeared from her life without a word. I blocked them both, moved cities, and started over. I buried the pain beneath work and ambition. I told myself revenge wasn't worth it, that I was better off without them. And for a while, I believed that. Until 5 years later, when Tyler walked into my office, looking like he hadn't slept in days. That's when everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon, overcast, drizzly, the kind of day that makes the whole city feel a little more tired than usual. I had just wrapped up back-to-back client calls and was grabbing a protein bar from my drawer when my assistant, Lauren, buzzed in. "Jason, there's a man here asking to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. He says his name is Tyler." I froze. The name hit me like a cold slap. I hadn't heard it spoken in years, not since I blocked his number, his socials, his very existence. I thought I'd exorcised him from my life. I'd moved cities, changed jobs, built something new from the ashes. I even told myself I was over it. I wasn't. "Tell him I'm not available," I said, my voice even. There was a pause. "Jason, I think you should see him. He looks rough." Rough didn't begin to cover it. When I finally stepped into the hallway and saw him sitting there on the sleek gray couch, he looked like a ghost of the man he used to be. Gaunt, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled blazer 2 sizes too big. He stood when he saw me, eyes wide with a mix of hope and humiliation. "Jason," he said, his voice cracking. I didn't respond, just opened the door to the conference room and walked in. If he wanted a conversation, he could earn it. He followed. That moment, that single moment, was the culmination of years of silence, betrayal, and quiet rebuilding. And Tyler had no idea what was about to hit him. But to explain why seeing him like that hit so hard, I need to rewind. After I left Becca, I went dark. I moved to a new city, one where no one knew my name or my story, and started over. I poured everything into my work. Finance was my safe zone. Numbers didn't lie. People did. I took a job at a growing private equity firm and worked like a man possessed. While Tyler and Becca were playing house, I was pulling 80-hour weeks, chasing deals, and climbing the ladder so fast it gave people whiplash. Pain has a funny way of sharpening your focus. In 2 years, I was a partner. In 4, I was offered the chance to head up a new division, an acquisition arm that specialized in rescuing distressed companies with potential. I said yes. It meant long nights, big stakes, and the freedom to build something from the ground up. I built that arm like it was my legacy. And one of the companies we absorbed, quietly, through a chain of shell entities, was a struggling tech startup with bloated expenses and an even more bloated CEO who happened to be none other than Greg, my former stepfather. It was almost poetic. The company was floundering. Bad leadership, over-promises, under-delivery, and a golden boy heir waiting in the wings to take over and revolutionize everything. I didn't reveal myself when we acquired it. I had no need to. The numbers alone told the story. They were bleeding money, ignoring compliance, and one lawsuit away from collapse. We cleaned house. Greg was bought out with a token severance and an airtight non-compete clause. Tyler was never officially employed, just consulting from time to time, which meant when the company restructured and rebranded, he lost everything. Not just a job, but the future he'd been promised. I didn't even do it out of revenge. At least, not at first. But when I found out Tyler had moved back in with Greg after a messy divorce, when I learned from an old mutual friend that he was broke, jobless, and reeling from a failed crypto scam, I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. Until he showed up at my office. He had no idea I owned the company he thought he was destined to run. That I had been the one who dismantled the throne he was supposed to inherit. And the fact that he was sitting across from me now, hat in hand, was surreal. But I didn't let it show. Not yet. Why are you here? I asked flatly. I didn't know you worked here, he said, glancing around. Someone told me this place was hiring for project managers. I figured I'd take a shot. I leaned back in the chair. So you're looking for a job? His face turned red. Not from you, if that's what you're thinking. I didn't even know you were. I didn't plan this. I didn't respond. Just let the silence stretch until it made him squirm. I messed up, he said finally. I know I did. With Becca. With everything. But life's kicked me pretty hard these last few years. I'm just trying to get back on my feet. You think this is rock bottom? I asked, finally breaking the silence. Tyler, you haven't even scratched the surface. He blinked. What's that supposed to mean? But I didn't answer. Because this wasn't the moment. Not yet. There were still layers to peel back. Still truths to be exposed. And something in me wanted him to sweat. The days after that visit were strange. I kept thinking about the past, about how Tyler's betrayal wasn't a single act, but a lifetime of entitlement. Becca was just the final blow, the tip of the iceberg. Growing up, he'd always taken what he wanted. Toys, attention, praise. Greg fed him this twisted narrative that the world owed him something, that success was his birthright. Meanwhile, I was taught to keep my head down and earn my place. And when Becca came into the picture, he saw her as just another prize. I never told anyone this, but the wedding invite? It wasn't just mailed. It was hand-delivered. 3 weeks after I vanished from Becca's life, Tyler showed up at my old apartment. I hadn't updated the address yet. My neighbor passed the envelope to my landlord, who called me in confusion. Some guy came by, he said. Said it was important you get this. Inside was a glossy, gold-trimmed invitation to their wedding. No note. Just a smug post it slapped on the front that read, "Thought you should see what you missed." I kept it. Not out of sentimentality, but as fuel. That same day, I framed the invite and put it in my desk drawer. Every time I worked late, every time I felt like quitting, I'd look at that frame and remind myself why I was building what I was building. Not for revenge, but for self-respect. But now, with Tyler back in my life, even if by accident, the lines were starting to blur. That weekend, I drove back to my hometown for the first time in years. My mom had moved to a smaller house after the divorce. We hadn't spoken much. Our relationship had always been strained. She'd chosen Greg over me too many times to count. But when she opened the door and saw me standing there, her face crumbled. "Jason," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You look older." "Yeah," I said. "Life does that." We talked. Not about the past. Not yet. But I asked her how things were. She said she was lonely. That Greg had moved to Florida. That Tyler was a mess. "He always talks about you," she said quietly. "He says he wishes you two had stayed close." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Back at my hotel that night, I found myself staring at the ceiling, mind racing. Tyler wasn't just a brother who'd crossed a line. He was a symbol of everything I'd fought to escape. Entitlement, arrogance, delusion. And now, he was knocking on my door, asking for scraps. And I realized something. He still had no idea what I was capable of. For a long time, I didn't know what rock bottom looked like. I always assumed it would be loud. Some spectacular explosion, like catching Becca and Tyler in bed or losing everything I'd worked for overnight. But when it came, it was quiet. Still, like the air had been sucked out of my world, and all that was left was the slow, suffocating silence. After I found those texts, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, listening to the water running in the bathroom. She was humming, Becca was humming. I remember thinking, how can she sound so normal? How could she be in there, brushing her teeth and humming like our lives weren't crumbling in real time? I didn't confront her that night, or the next. Instead, I pulled away slowly. Methodically, I started sleeping on the couch under the excuse of late-night work. I canceled our wedding venue through a private email, contacted the vendors, got deposits back where I could. She thought I was just stressed. She chalked it up to nerves, pressure, work, anything but the truth. The part that gutted me most? I still loved her, even after seeing her betray me. My heart didn't get the memo that she was gone, that she'd already picked someone else. So I went numb. On a Tuesday morning, while she was at a work conference, I packed a single suitcase. I left the ring on the kitchen counter, next to the framed photo of us in Central Park. And then I walked out. I blocked her number on the train ride to a new city. Changed emails. I even deactivated my social media. I left no note, no forwarding address. I wanted to disappear before I collapsed. And I did collapse. My first month in the city, I lived out of a dingy sublet with peeling paint and a broken heater. I didn't eat much. I didn't talk to anyone. Just woke up, went to work, came home, and stared at the ceiling. Over and over. I had a job at a mid-tier finance firm. Stable, boring, lifeless. I didn't care. I just needed routine. Something to hold on to. There were days I didn't shower. Days I forgot to eat. Nights I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced Becca and Tyler were standing at the foot of my bed, laughing. I couldn't go home. Not to my mom, who'd always treated Tyler like the sun and me like a shadow. She'd probably find a way to blame me for the breakup. Maybe if you'd been more romantic. I could already hear her saying. So I suffered alone. But rock bottom has this funny way of showing you who you really are. One night, I was walking home from work late, past the bakery on 6th that always left their day-olds in a crate outside. I stopped, grabbed a croissant, and sat on the cold stone steps of a closed bookstore. I didn't have headphones. Didn't even check my phone. I just sat, chewing, watching people go by. That's when I saw this older man in a wrinkled gray suit pacing under the flickering streetlight. He looked lost, tired. At one point he stopped, looked around like he'd forgotten where he was, and then kept moving. And for some reason, I thought, that's going to be me if I don't get it together. I threw away the croissant, stood up, and walked straight to the 24-hour gym 2 blocks away. I paid the sign-up fee, got a membership, and started working out at midnight, every night, for a month. Not because I wanted to look better, but because I needed to feel something again. I needed the burn, the ache, the slow return of control. It was small at first. An extra 5 pounds on the bench, a faster mile, a slightly better posture in the mirror. But every tiny win reminded me I was still here, still fighting. Work became my next obsession. I stayed late, volunteered for every project, and studied financial models until my eyes blurred. I found patterns others missed. Cleaned up client portfolios like a machine. Within 6 months, I was promoted. Not because I was friendly, God knows I wasn't, but because I was relentless. I also started reading again. Books I used to love but had forgotten about. Business memoirs, psychology, negotiation strategies. I filled notebooks with scribbled ideas, diagrams, investment theses. I taught myself how to code financial analysis scripts to speed up my work. Slowly, I started piecing together a new identity, not as someone defined by what he'd lost, but by what he was becoming. That's when I met Alan. He was a senior partner at a competing firm, visiting ours for a joint project. Sharp guy, mid-50s, silver hair, direct eye contact. We were paired on a due diligence team, and after the first meeting, he pulled me aside and said, "You see numbers like other people see colors." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He invited me out to dinner a week later, asked me questions about my background, what I wanted. I told him I didn't know, that I'd had a rough year, that I was just surviving. He nodded and said, "You're not surviving. You're sharpening." A month later, he offered me a job at his new private equity firm, a boutique outfit with big ambitions and a lean, hungry team. He gave me a seat at the table, not because of my resume, but because he saw the fire I didn't even know was visible. And for the first time in my life, someone believed in me without needing me to be Tyler. The job was brutal at first. High stakes, high pressure. We were buying distressed companies and flipping them into profitability, sometimes with just months to pull it off. I traveled constantly, slept on planes, ate like garbage. But I was learning, evolving. We weren't just fixing businesses, we were rebuilding them from the inside. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was doing the same thing to myself. I started dressing better. Tailored suits, clean cuts, not because I cared about appearances, but because I wanted to see myself as someone who mattered, someone with weight. I reconnected with a therapist, unpacked years of resentment. My dad's death, Greg's constant favoritism, my mom's quiet indifference, Tyler's smug entitlement, Becca's betrayal. I felt invisible, I told her once. She nodded. So you made yourself undeniable. 2 years into the new job, I was leading deals on my own. I negotiated a $12 million acquisition with a boardroom full of men twice my age, and walked out with the paperwork signed and a congratulatory whiskey in hand. 3 years in, I was given control over a new division, focused entirely on strategic turnarounds. And in our 4th year, that division acquired Greg's company. I didn't push for it. It landed on my desk like fate. A failing tech firm trying to pivot to app-based logistics. Terrible numbers. Even worse leadership. But the bones were good. With the right strategy, we could make something out of it. I ran the numbers. Built the case. Got approval. It was just another file in a stack until I saw the founder's name. Gregory Allen. And listed under advisors. Tyler Allen. I laughed. Out loud. Alone in my office. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. We bought the company, gutted leadership, and restructured everything. Greg was ousted with a handshake and a modest buyout. Tyler wasn't even given that. He was never formally on the payroll. He had no equity, nothing to negotiate with. It was done. I thought that was the end of it, until Tyler walked into my office. And now? Now I had to decide what came next. Because he wasn't just a failed brother or a messy ex's new mistake. He was standing in front of the man he'd mocked, humiliated, and written off, desperate, broke, and clueless. He had no idea that everything he'd taken for granted now belonged to me. And I wasn't done yet. Tyler showing up at my office wasn't just a coincidence. It was a signal. A signal that the past, no matter how buried, always finds a way back. And now that it had, I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. After he left that day, tail between his legs, still unaware I owned the company he'd once been groomed to inherit, I sat in my office and stared at the framed wedding invite on my bookshelf. The same one he'd smugly delivered 5 years ago. That stupid gold trim, the swirly cursive font. Jason, the post-it note had read, "Just so you know what you missed." I leaned back in my chair and whispered to no one. It's my turn now. I didn't want to humiliate him in the street or scream at him in public. That's what he would have done. I wanted something cleaner, sharper. A revenge that didn't just sting, it rewrote the entire story. A slow, surgical correction of every page he'd tried to tear out of my life. Step 1. Information. I called Lauren, my assistant, into the room and asked her to discreetly run a full background check on Tyler Allen. Employment history, credit score, criminal record, social media presence, everything. She didn't ask why. She knew me well enough by now. When I got quiet like this, it meant someone was in my crosshairs. By the next morning, the file was on my desk. Tyler was in worse shape than I thought. Bankruptcy declared last year. Over $100,000 in credit card debt. An abandoned LLC that hadn't filed taxes in 3 years. Evicted from his last apartment. He was living out of a tiny rental in a bad part of town, driving a rusted-out Jeep that hadn't passed inspection in 2 years. No job history in the last 18 months. The only gig on his resume was freelance crypto consulting, which meant absolutely nothing. But here's where it got interesting. He'd been reaching out to a dozen startups in the past 2 months, trying to leverage his last name, his vision, whatever scraps of credibility he had left. He was pitching an app, a delivery service with some vague blockchain twist. It was a mess, full of buzzwords and typos. But it had one clear goal, to secure enough angel funding to crawl out of the hole he'd dug. It was exactly the kind of desperate gamble a man like him would cling to. So I decided to bite. But not as Jason. Instead, I created a new identity. Brandon Kerr, an investor from Austin with a passion for disruptive logistics startups. I set up a LinkedIn, bought a burner phone, and used one of our shell holding companies to make it all look legitimate. A few emails later, and Brandon Kerr was scheduling a coffee meeting with Tyler Allen. I met him at a trendy cafe downtown. Wore jeans, a vest, some startup bro glasses. Just enough polish to look legit, but casual enough to disarm him. When he walked in, his eyes darted around nervously, like he thought someone might recognize him. He didn't recognize me. Not with the beard I'd grown out, the weight I'd lost, or the fake southern drawl I put on just enough to sell the character. He walked right up to me and shook my hand like we'd never met. "Tyler Allen," he said, forcing a confident smile. "Brandon," I replied. "Pleasure's mine, man." He launched into his pitch immediately. No slides, no prep, just words. Buzzwords, mostly. On-demand logistics, last-mile disruption, tokenized driver incentives. It was all fluff. I let him talk for 20 minutes while I sipped my coffee and nodded like I was impressed. Finally, I cut in. "I like it," I said. "But I'm not gonna lie, Ty. Can I call you Ty? This thing's risky. And I only invest when I can bring in someone who can actually run the ops side." He leaned in. "I'm open to bringing in a partner." I smiled. "You ever heard of Keystone?" He frowned. "The investment firm?" "Yeah," I said. "I've got a contact there. Think they might be interested in a joint venture. But only if you've got a clean slate. You got any skeletons in the closet, Ty?" He hesitated. "Nothing serious," he lied. I nodded slowly. "All right. I'll reach out to my guy. See if we can set something up. You got a deck?" He didn't. Of course he didn't. "I'll work on it tonight," he said quickly. "Get it to you by tomorrow." I stood up and clapped him on the shoulder. "Now we're talking." As I walked away, I didn't look back. That night, I reached out to our legal team and gave them a new project: create a holding company that would appear to be a venture partner interested in investing in Tyler's app. Nothing real, just a shell, a baited hook. I also had my team set up a fake corporate email domain, complete with titles like Head of Strategy and Due Diligence Director, all staffed by trusted colleagues who knew how to play along. We called it Griffin Partners. Step 2, the setup. Over the next 2 weeks, I had Griffin Partners engage with Tyler like he was the next big thing. We requested a full proposal, financials, projections, a rollout plan. He delivered half-baked spreadsheets and laughable revenue models, but we acted like they were gold. I even had our analyst suggest that we could potentially offer him a $200,000 signing bonus once the paperwork cleared. Tyler took the bait. Hard. He started name-dropping us on LinkedIn, revived his dormant Twitter account, sent emails to former contacts saying big things were coming. I watched from behind the curtain as he rebuilt his ego on a foundation of smoke and mirrors. But I wasn't done. Step 3, the mirror. I scheduled a formal meeting between Griffin Partners and Tyler to finalize the term sheet. We booked a conference room in one of our downtown buildings, sleek, modern, intimidating. I made sure the receptionist called me the moment Tyler arrived. I walked into the room with 2 of my real team members, Lauren, and one of our junior partners, Malik. Both briefed, both ready. Tyler stood when we entered. His face was pale, nervous but excited. And then he saw me. Not Brandon. Me. Jason. There was a silence so sharp it hurt. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again like a fish gasping on dry land. I took a seat across from him and slid the wedding invitation across the table. "Thought you should see what you missed." Lauren let out the softest laugh. Malik raised an eyebrow. Tyler looked like he might pass out. This is a joke," he stammered. "It's not," I said. "Griffin Partners isn't real. Your app isn't viable. And the only reason you're sitting here is because I wanted you to." His voice cracked. "Why?" I leaned forward, slow and calm. "Because 5 years ago, you handed me this," I said, tapping the invite. "You stole my fiancée, my dignity, my peace, and you wanted me to watch you celebrate it." He looked away. "So now," I continued, "I wanted you to feel what it's like to hope again, to build something in your head, to taste it, and then lose it." I let the silence settle. "This meeting's over." As I stood up, I reached into my folder and placed one final document on the table, a printout of his personal financial statement, with the Griffin logo watermarked across the top and the words "Do not proceed" stamped in red. He didn't move, didn't say a word, and I walked out without looking back. But this wasn't over, because I had one final move to make. For a few weeks after that meeting, I didn't hear a word from Tyler. No calls, no emails, no veiled social media posts, just silence. At first, I thought maybe he'd gotten the message, that the fantasy was over, that the game was up, that for once in his life, he'd accepted a consequence without trying to slither out of it. But Tyler had always been allergic to accountability. I should have known better. He resurfaced one afternoon in the most Tyler way possible, publicly, and with just enough arrogance to make it embarrassing. I was scrolling through LinkedIn during a short break between meetings when I saw it. A post from a newly formed startup called Drive Chain Solutions, founded by visionary entrepreneur Tyler Allen. The post was an amateur mock-up of a delivery app interface, complete with pixelated graphics, buzzwords galore, and a caption that read, "After months of silence, I'm finally ready to show the world what I've been building. Haters gonna hate. But real ones know, when you're built different, you never stay down for long." It had 2 likes and 1 comment from his mom. I almost laughed. Almost. But then I noticed something that stopped me cold. In the list of advisors on the company's About page was my name. Not Jason Allen, but Brandon Kerr. He'd taken the fake investor I created and plastered him all over the site to give himself credibility. There was even a fake testimonial beneath a stock headshot I'd used. "Tyler's vision is the future." I'd stake my firm on it. Brandon Kerr, Griffin Partners. He'd used my own lie to prop himself up. And just like that, the final domino fell into place. I was done playing nice. The first call I made was to my legal team. Within 24 hours, we'd served Tyler with a cease and desist for misusing the Griffin Partners brand, likeness, and fabricated endorsements. It was airtight. Even though Griffin wasn't technically a real firm, it was backed by a legitimate holding company under our corporate umbrella, giving us full legal standing. But I didn't stop there. Next, I made a quiet call to an old friend from my undergrad years, Sarah McConnell, now a senior editor at a rising tech media outlet. I gave her the tip of a lifetime. A startup scam story featuring a once promising founder who was using fake investors, non-existent partnerships, and buzzword-laced nonsense to drum up funding from unsuspecting backers. I sent her everything: screenshots, fake testimonials, domain records, the original pitch deck Tyler had emailed me while pretending I was Brandon. Every lie, every exaggeration, every pathetic attempt at legitimacy. She smelled blood in the water and went after it like a shark. Within a week, her article dropped. The startup that was never real. Inside Drive Chain's fabricated foundation. It spread like wildfire. Tech Twitter ran with it. LinkedIn lit up. Reddit tore it apart piece by piece. Tyler's name trended locally for all the wrong reasons. Within hours, the Drive Chain website was taken down. The domain went dark. His LinkedIn vanished. And then came the fallout. Turns out Tyler had convinced 2 small-time investors to give him seed money, $25,000 each, based on the promise that Griffin Partners was involved. They'd seen my name and Brandon Kerr's on the website and thought it checked out. When the article broke, both investors lawyered up and filed fraud claims. One of them went straight to the state attorney general's office. I didn't even have to lift a finger. Greg, his father, my old stepdad, called my mother in a panic. I wasn't there, obviously, but I heard later from her voicemail, which she left half intentionally, half passive-aggressively, that he was furious. "He's ruining Tyler's life," Greg had said. "Your son's always had a chip on his shoulder. I knew he'd come for us eventually. Come for us. Like I was the aggressor. Like I hadn't been cleaning up the messes they left behind for years." That voicemail was the final nail in the coffin for me and my mother. I called her back only once. "I didn't ruin Tyler's life," I told her. "He did that all on his own. I just held up a mirror." She didn't respond. Not then. Not in the weeks that followed. I think, deep down, she knew. Maybe for the first time in her life, she understood just how badly she'd chosen. How many times she'd picked comfort and favoritism over fairness. Over her own son. But I didn't need her validation anymore. I had something better. About 2 months later, I was hosting a private investor event for one of our new portfolio companies, an innovative logistics firm that was already disrupting the very market Tyler had tried, and failed, to enter. The event was swanky, hosted on a rooftop in Midtown, filled with suits and power players. But I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about the man standing in the lobby downstairs. Tyler had shown up. He wasn't on the guest list. He wasn't invited. But somehow, he'd heard about the event. And in his usual fashion, he tried to bluff his way in. "I'm with Griffin," he told the receptionist. But the receptionist had been trained. She smiled sweetly, called security, and then called me. "Do you want us to escort him out?" she asked. I stared out at the skyline for a moment. "No," I said. "Let him up." A few minutes later, he was stepping off the elevator, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie undone, There were dark circles under his eyes. Jason, he said, his voice low. I gestured to an empty barstool beside me. He didn't sit. I lost everything, he whispered. Investors are threatening lawsuits. My credit's shot. I'm blacklisted from every startup incubator in the state. I nodded slowly. I know. I didn't know it was you, he said, his voice cracking. Brandon Kerr. Griffin. All of it. I thought I could fake it till I made it. I turned to face him. Calm. Steady. You faked it at my expense, I said. You took something from me. Someone I loved. And you wanted me to suffer for it. He swallowed hard. That was a long time ago. Yeah, I said. And I've spent every day since building something real. You spent it chasing shortcuts. There was silence. Then, with a shaky breath, he said, Can you help me? I stared at him. At the man who once laughed in my face, who once sat at my family's dinner table and soaked up praise while I was invisible. And I said, No. I turned away. He didn't speak again, just stood there for a long moment, then walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and vanished. That was the last time I saw him. It's been a year since then. Drive Chain never recovered. Tyler filed for personal bankruptcy again, and as far as I know, he's doing odd jobs under the table to avoid debt collectors. Greg moved to a retirement community in Florida. My mother still sends the occasional card, but I don't respond. I'm engaged again now, to someone kind, grounded, and honest. Someone who doesn't live in shadows or hide behind charm. She knows the whole story. I told her everything. And one day, when we were packing up boxes to move into our new place, she found the old wedding invitation. Tyler and Becca's. She held it up, confused. You want to keep this? I looked at it for a long time. Then I smiled. No, I said. Let's throw it out. She tossed it in the bin. And just like that, the last ghost was gone. I stood by the window after she left the room, looking out at the city I'd rebuilt myself in. I thought about who I'd been, who I'd become, and what it took to get here. And in that quiet moment, I realized something I wish I'd known a decade earlier. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming untouchable.